Eve was alone when she realized there was someone hiding underneath the kitchen floor. She knew the instant she walked over this one specific spot, because the creak of the floor there was different. The kitchen floor was very old, Victorian pine board planks with small gaps between them. It was noisy in places, but Eve didn't mind. She walked the same path through the kitchen at least 5 times every day, a triangle, from the door to the kettle, from the kettle to the sugar, from the sugar to the door. She knew the sound of every step by heart. But when she took that one step on that one spot, the sound sent a jolt through her. The floor there should have squeaked. Instead, it groaned. Eve almost dropped her tea in shock. Don't look down. Some instinct told Eve to pretend nothing was wrong, even though her heart was hammering, even though she wanted to get the hell out of there. Eve kept her hands steady and finished making her tea using the same calm movements she always used. Stir sugar in 3 times, tap the spoon off twice, sip once, and walk away. Perfectly calm. Eve managed to keep her calm until she was out of the kitchen and down the back hallway. Once she was just out of sight of the kitchen door, she let her feelings of fear flood in. Her hands shook so hard she spilled tea on her sweater. She tried to place her teacup on a hall table, but her shaking fingers fumbled. The teacup fell and shattered on the floor. She pressed her back against the wall and tried to catch her breath and make sense of her own frantic logic. Why had a single strange sound scared Eve so much? Why? And why had she pretended everything was fine, even though it wasn't, until she was out of view of the kitchen floor? Because of the gaps. Yes. The gaps between the kitchen floorboards. If someone hiding beneath that floor was positioned just right, they'd be able to look up through the gaps. They'd see the whole kitchen from down there. Eve had never thought about it before, and she didn't like the thought. Was it true? Don't look. Was there a face pressed against the underside of the kitchen floorboards with one eye lined up against one of those gaps? Don't look. Eve imagined the glassy, wet eyeball rolling back and forth, watching her. It made her stomach churn. Just stay out of the kitchen, Eve told herself. Stay right here until everyone else gets home, and they'll help me. This was a good enough thought, until another thought crept inside her skull. They're going to laugh at me, Eve thought to herself. They'll come home and listen to my story about the weird sound in the kitchen floor, and they're going to call me crazy, and they're not going to help me. They're going to laugh at me. They're going to laugh at you. Eve needed more than a story. She needed proof. She needed to find the eye in the floor. Don't look. Then she could show them the eye. Then they wouldn't laugh. They're gonna laugh at you. Eve knew she had to march into the kitchen and check every gap in the floor until she found that eyeball looking back at her. But she was too scared to do it. They're going to laugh at you. Eve could imagine the eye swiveling, watching for her shadow, waiting for her to come back. Eve didn't like to be laughed at. She didn't like to be looked at. Don't look. The house was quiet except for the clock ticking in the hall. Eve listened for anything. Any hint of wood scraping, any sound of boards breaking, any breath that wasn't hers, but there was nothing. The clock struck the hour. The tea she spilled on her sweater turned cold. Darkness crept along the walls and across Eve's skin. The darkness gave her an idea, and a bit of cover, and a bit of courage. She needed a flashlight. Eve tiptoed in sock feet through the pieces of broken teacup and into the mudroom by the back door. She found the flashlight, standing on the top shelf there. Then, quick as lightning, Eve launched herself back up the hallway right into the kitchen door and flicked the flashlight on. There, a glint, a glimmer of light between those two boards. Not just any glimmer, Eve knew. It was a reflection. The way light bounces off the back of an open eye. It was unmistakable. "I see you," Eve said out loud to the glint in the floor. Eve turned the kitchen light on. She saw the eye, as clear as day. The black pupil, the brown iris, the eyelids, the white. The eye looked back at Eve. "Stop looking at me," Eve told the eye. But the eye in the floor kept looking. The longer the eye looked at Eve, the worse it was. Because Eve didn't like it. "Stop looking." The eye in the floor had seen Eve leave the kitchen with her tea and come back with the flashlight. But the eye in the floor hadn't been able to see Eve take the flashlight from the mudroom, because the mudroom was all the way down the hall. The eye in the floor didn't know that Eve had taken two things from the mudroom: a flashlight and a screwdriver. Eve kept one hand behind her back as she took 3 steps closer. She looked straight down at the eye. The eye looked up at her. "You have 3 seconds to get the hell out of my floor," Eve told the eye. Eve revealed her hand from behind her back. No. She held the long, sharp metal screwdriver like a dagger. Eve counted down. 3. She crouched next to the eye. She steadied the pointed end of the screwdriver directly over the open eye. 2. The eye flicked back and forth between Eve and the screwdriver, but it didn't look away or move away. Why wouldn't the eye move away? 1. Eve woke up in the dark. She couldn't move. She couldn't see. The smell of wood clung to her nose. Splinters pressed into her skin. There was barely enough air to breathe. "Where am I?" she had to ask herself inside her own head, because she couldn't move her tongue or throat to make a sound. Eve lay on her back. Her arms were rail straight against her body. Her legs had no room to move. She couldn't lift her head or turn in any direction. She was trapped, as if she was locked inside a long, pitch-dark, narrow box, like a coffin. No. Eve tried to keep her mind calm. Suddenly, Eve could see someone had turned a light on somewhere. Not enough light to fill whatever nightmarish place Eve was trapped in, just enough light to seep down through the gap between the 2 wooden boards above Eve's face, right above her eye. She heard very familiar sounds above her, the sound of wood creaking in a pattern she knew by heart. No. Where was this bizarre limbo? What was up there above the boards? Eve pressed her eye against the gap between the boards above her. She recognized it right away. It was her kitchen. No. And it wasn't empty. Eve could see herself up there, leaning on the counter, waiting for the kettle, letting it screech. No. Eve was trapped underneath her own kitchen floor. No. She wanted to scream, to fight, to bang or kick against the boards above her, or use her elbows or heels to break through the wood beneath her, but she couldn't. She couldn't move anything, only her eye. All she could do was watch herself pour water into her teacup and walk across the kitchen to the sugar. Eve watched her own sock foot come down right above her eye. The sound the wood floor made under the sock foot was different. It sounded like a groan. Eve under the floor tried desperately to see if the Eve above had heard it, but Eve above acted normal. Eve above stirred the sugar into her teacup 3 stirs, 2 taps, 1 sip, and she walked out of the kitchen and down the back hallway, perfectly calm. Eve under the floor couldn't see that far down the hall from where she was, but she could hear things. She heard the sound of a teacup shatter. She heard the clock strike, but she couldn't move. She couldn't scream. There was nothing she could do except watch through the gap in the floor as Eve above returned to the kitchen with one hand behind her back and started counting backwards from 3. Darkside Tales is written by Vanessa F. Penney. Produced, narrated, and edited by Roxanne Potvin.